S-244.
Sénatrice Bellemare.
Senator Bellemare. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I am pleased to move the adoption in second reading of S-244. It is moved by the Honourable Senator Bellemare, seconded by the Honourable Senator Dalphon, that this bill be read a second time on debate. Senator Bellemare. This bill is the result of discussions among several groups representing various labour market actors involved in employment insurance. For the unions, the Canada Labour Congress played a leading role. Other participants include the FTQ, the CSN, Unifor, and the Building and Construction Trades Unions. On the employer side, the Canadian Chamber of Commerce was the regular point of contact. The Fédération des Chambres, the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, the Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters, the Fédération des Chambres de Commerce du Québec, and the Conseil du Patronat du Québec took part in the exchanges. I'd also like to thank the two EI commissioners, Pierre Laliberté, Commissioner for Workers, and Nancy Haley, Commissioner for Business, for their participation and their insightful comments. Thanks also to my team and the forensic scientists, as well to my special advisor, Michel Cournoyer. The purpose of this bill is to strengthen social dialogue within the Employment Insurance Commission. The current consultation-based structure of the EI Commission no longer meets current needs. This system, which is funded entirely by employers and workers, plays a major role in the labour market in terms of compensation and also in terms of employment policies that facilitate transitions. It failed, however, during the pandemic and is in need of major reform. The changes to be made will be more or less effective depending on the input of stakeholders in the definition and implementation of these measures. The bill was co-developed by labour market partners, and both the employers and workers commissioners took an active role in its drafting. The bill is quite simple. It seeks to create, in federal legislation, an advisory committee to the existing EI Commission. Under the co-chairmanship of the Worker and Employer Commissioners, it is proposed that the advisory committee consist of an equal number of worker and employer representatives. In addition to the current commissioners, the additional members of this advisory committee would not be compensated and would have no specific impact then on the budget. What is social dialogue? It often happens when I speak about social dialogue that people ask me, what are you talking about? Now, it's true that in Canada, we don't talk about social dialogue on a daily basis, and yet it's a common practice here, especially in Quebec, but even more so in most industrialized countries. The International Labour Organization, a member organization of the UN, proposes the following definition of social dialogue, and I quote, "Social dialogue is defined by the International Labour Organization as including all types of negotiation, consultation, or simply exchange of information between or among government representatives, employers, and workers on matters of common interest relating to economic and social policy." Social dialogue takes different forms. It can take the form of a tripartite process, with the government as a formal party to the dialogue, or bipartite relations between worker representatives and management at the enterprise level, or trade unions and employee organizations at higher levels. Social dialogue can be informal or institutionalized and is often a mixture of both forms. It can take place at national, regional, international, cross-border, or local levels. It can involve social partners from different economic sectors within the same sector or within the same company or group of companies. End quote. The ILO also states that, quote, "The main objective of social dialogue, as such, is to encourage consensus building among the main actors in the world of work and their democratic participation. The structures and processes of a fruitful social dialogue have the potential to resolve important economic and social issues, promote good governance, foster peace and social stability, and stimulate the economy." End quote. When we read that it is a collective process of negotiation or exchange of information, we can conclude then that Canada practices social dialogue. In fact, consultation, as it's often perceived, is only the beginning of a sustainable social dialogue aimed at collaboration. On a second reading on what the ILO says, it's clear that social dialogue is not a unilateral or one-way process, as is the case with the consultation processes that governments undertake in Canada in developing draft legislation. Consultation is less effective than collaboration. Why? Well, because consultation can give way to several answers, whereas collaboration identifies the mutually acceptable and generally mutual beneficial solutions. Let's take the example of labor relations in a company. Labor relations specialists will immediately understand that a negotiated employment contract is always preferable to an employment contract decreed by an arbitrator after consultation with the parties. More often, when power is balanced and the process is carried out in good faith, bargaining leads to agreements that are mutually beneficial in terms of both productivity and equity. The outcome is often consistent with a positive sum game in the collective organization of work, production, and compensation. This is not necessarily the case in arbitration. After hearing the official versions of the parties, the arbitrator usually splits the difference. The result will be less optimal.
Social dialogue is a form of negotiation at the national level, which results in the determination of more effective and fairer labor market policies than would otherwise be the case. It is an effective process because it reveals the multiple facets of the same reality. It allows for innovation in mutually beneficial solutions. It allows the unexpected effects of policies to be taken into account and the losers to be compensated. Social dialogue also ensures greater social acceptability among companies and the workforce, facilitating its implementation.
The social dialogue process is very different from a specific and time-limited public consultation carried out by elected officials or civil servants to support political decisions that have often already been made. Tripartite consultation, generally concentrates the information to the decision makers, and above all, it does not allow the identification of innovative solutions because consultation does not favor exchanges between the parties. Consultation, as it is most often practiced, is not a consensus-building process. Rather, it often results in opposing views of those consulted. As a result, the public servants and politicians who choose the strategies will often be unhappy. There may be winners and losers, which will not make it easier to implement the strategies. In short, social dialogue is a more transparent process than consultation because all actors have access to the information provided by the others. The feedback and validation of information take place simultaneously around the table. This is a process that encompasses the concerns of the various actors. The result of social dialogue offers convergent solution and promotes social consensus, which bilateral consultation cannot do. It also facilitates policy implementation, which makes it a positive sum game. That's enough theory. Let's talk about something a little more concrete now. I've had the opportunity to see social dialogue in action in the context of labor market policies in Quebec. I want to tell you about a small chapter of the achievements of the Commissaire des Partenaires du Marché du Travail. In Quebec, this body, the Labor Market Partners Commission, has existed since 1993. It was created as the board of directors of the Société québécoise de développement de la main-d'œuvre, Labor Development Society, an organization whose mandate was to manage federally and Quebec-funded labor market and training programs. In 1994, at the request of Quebec's employer and worker associations, the composition of the board was changed to include representatives of associations rather than individuals. The government of the time accepted this request. At the same time, I became the CEO of this organization during this restructuring. At the time, the minister responsible for this file endorsed the priorities of the Forum pour l'Emploi, the Forum for Employment. This was a non-profit organization created in 1987 to structure social dialogue in Quebec. The Forum pour l'Emploi was the expression of a collective will on the part of Quebec's economic actors to contribute to lowering the unemployment rate and to stimulate productivity growth. The impetus for the movement was the publication of a book entitled Le défi du plein emploi, The Challenge of Full Employment, that I co-authored with my colleague Lise Poulin-Simon, who sadly passed away too young in 1995. This book compared the employment policies of countries that had managed to get through the economic period of the 1976 oil shock relatively well, while Canada had been experiencing stagflation since 1976. The book generated a lot of public interest, and two former federal public servants came knocking on our door to challenge us to do what the book said. We decided to take up the challenge by bringing together a group of people from different backgrounds, but all were interested in collective action. At the beginning, this nonprofit was chaired by Claude Bellemare. You may recognize the name. He was president of the Desjardins movement at the time, and Louis Laberge, who was president of the FTQ and the Fonds de Solidarité. It was composed of all the driving forces of the Quebec labor market. The union, employers, and employer associations were all represented, as well as municipalities, certain large companies, youth associations, women's associations, the vocational training sector, and others. The Forum pour l'Emploi was eager to see a major reform of labor programs and a coordination or even a merger of federal and Quebec programs in order to focus efforts on obtaining concrete results in terms of job integration, and employment reduction, rather than on program compliance. Thus, employer and worker representatives made representations to the federal government to ensure a devolution of programs and measures to the provincial level. The objective was to create a fund for workplace development managed by Quebec. In 1996, the agreement was signed, the fund was created, and made up of credits from the federal and Quebec governments. The agreement provided and still provides for results-based objectives, and management by programs was abandoned in favor of management by results. At the time, more than 100 programs were abolished. These programs were aimed at certain categories of people and bore the name of the minister who had wanted them to be created. They did not allow for any fiscal flexibility or budgetary flexibility, so that if at the end of the year the planned amounts were not spent, these amounts were returned to the public treasury, even if there were still obviously unmet needs on the labor market. There is no need to explain why these programs received bad evaluations. Social partners enabled the shift from program-based to outcome-based management of public funds. That was major as an achievement. Today, the SQDM has been replaced by Emploi Québec, which has merged the staff of the SQDM, the staff of the Federal Employment Service offices, and those of social assistance. The Commission des partenaires du marché du travail, the Labour Market Partners Commission, still contributes to the management of Emploi Québec, more specifically in the area of training and employment services. Management by results is maintained, and the partners must ensure that political powers do not erode it through the back door by recreating program categories with a political bent. They ensure that the socio-economic logic of the labor market prevails over partisan political objectives.
In short, this story aims to show that social dialogue in the labor market and at a national level is more than consultation. Social dialogue is about consulting each other to give advice that respect the collective logic of the labor market, to find together optimal solution for specific need. And in many cases, in many countries, social dialogue is used to manage unemployment insurance program, as well as investment in labor force development.
What we can learn from this story is that the participation of economic and social partners in decisions concerning labor market policies is a win-win solution for society. They have the information from the field that statistics cannot reveal. They put the policies into practice, integrate them into their human resource management practices, and they experiences the consequences. Their participation is necessary for the success of the programs.
In employment and labor must respect the logic of the labor market and not the electoral logic in the number of votes. Our sustainable prosperity depends on it. Programs cannot change every 4 years and follow political logic.
However, social dialogue is not a spontaneous practice. Among the conditions necessary to initiate a fruitful social dialogue is mutual trust between the parties. Not all employers have good relationships with their employees, and vice versa. Social dialogue can be a powerful antidote to the polarization of ideas that comes with social networks. But to thrive, social dialogue needs an environment that fosters mutual trust. Governments have a role to play in creating environments that foster mutual trust. This is not always obvious when, at the same time, politicians in government are engaged in divide and conquer partisan strategies.
As an OECD report for the Global Deal mentioned, and I quote, social partners and the government cannot build and maintain an effective dialogue without mutual trust. While there is no single recipe to build trust, OECD studies have identified some key determinants of trust in one specific institution, namely the national government. These include integrity of high-level government officials, government's reliability in case of crisis, openness to citizen voice, as well as responsiveness to citizen concern. In addition, the following factors enhance trust. First, availability of institution and structure where social partners can regularly meet and discuss to arrive at a common understanding, from workplaces up to national level. Second, access to accurate information by all sides. 3, mechanisms that ensure enforcement of collective agreement and other commitments. 4, institutional stability to create, share, and encode expectation. 5, respect for autonomy of social partners. 6, avoidance of excessive mutual strife and competition between social partners themselves.
All studies that have examined the issue of social dialogue indicate that at least two conditions are necessary for the sustained and effective practice of dialogue. The first is the recognition and willingness of governments to engage in social dialogue to determine public policy, on labor issues. The second is the importance of institutionalizing this practice in order to sustain mutual trust and to develop a culture of collaboration. Colleagues, I think you've understood my message. Social dialogue is a major facilitator for achieving effectiveness and equity in the production system and in the labor market. That is why the International Labour Organization has always promoted social dialogue at the international level, even in the least developed countries. The ILO has produced recommendations and conventions identifying good practices in this area. Canada has signed many ILO conventions. The Government of Canada supports the practice and recognizes the importance of social dialogue through these international commitments. Recently, in 2016, the federal government supported the Global Compact for Decent Work and Inclusive Growth, launched by the Swedish Prime Minister Stefan Löfven and established in collaboration with the OECD and the ILO. Its objective is to harness the potential of social dialogue as an instrument to promote better jobs, fairer working conditions, and more inclusive growth, in line with the UN 2030 Agenda. In addition, the ILO Declaration on Social Justice for a Fair Globalization, which expresses the contemporary vision of the ILO's mandate in the era of globalization, was adopted by all its members in 2008, including Canada. The declaration promotes decent work through a coordinated approach to achieving four strategic objectives: employment, social protection, social dialogue, and fundamental principles and rights at work. As stated in the declaration, social dialogue and tripartism are methods best suited to tailor the implementation of the strategic objectives to the needs and circumstances of each country, and to translate economic development into social progress and social progress into economic development, among others. In 2011, Canada also ratified Convention number 44, Tripartite Consultation Convention, International Labour Standards, which recognizes social dialogue, that is, effective consultation between representatives of government, employers, and workers in the implementation of these procedures on matters concerning the activities of the ILO. The Employment Service Convention 1948, number 88, was ratified by Canada in 1950. Article 4 stipulates that representatives of employers and workers in these national advisory committees shall be appointed in equal numbers after consultation with representative organizations of employers and workers.
Colleagues, social dialogue plays an important role in many societies. Indeed, history shows that private market institutions and the principle of competition do not function optimally in the labor market, especially when it comes to unemployment compensation and insurance or skills development. Similarly, the central planning of the production system and the labor market do not work in countries which are not considered democratic. Social dialogue institutions can be found around the world at several levels of governance. They exist at the national level to identify broad economic and social policy issues and possible strategies to address them. Several countries use social dialogue for more specific issues such as workforce development.
On the macro level, the International Association of Economic and Social Councils and similar institutions is an organization that assembles economics and social councils from 72 countries in Africa, Europe, Latin America, the Caribbean, and Asia. It has been created in 1999, and it has its head office in Brussels, Belgium. On y retrouve de nombreux pays.
It includes many countries: France, Belgium, Greece, Cameroon, Brazil, Mexico, and many others, even China. On labor issues, the Scandinavian countries are role models and, above all, pioneers in the field, as are Germany and Austria, countries that I studied and observed in action in a previous professional life. More than half of Europe's countries have set up tripartite institutions which are actively involved in the management of labor and unemployment insurance programs. In recent years, there's been an increased interest in social dialogue on the international scene, and it's not surprising, given the challenges of mobilizing collective action to achieve such a major common goal as the sustainable development of our planet. The pursuit of the Sustainable Development Goals and Agenda 2030 requires the development of a common strategy and therefore requires an important and robust social dialogue at all levels. The transition to green economies requires the adoption of sustainable practices in the labor market, because that is where wealth is created and distributed. Now, what of social dialogue at the federal level in Canada? Well, before I get into this section, I'd like to pay tribute to an economist I don't personally know, but would have loved to meet in the context of this bill. I'm talking about Donna Woods, who passed away in 2019. After 25 years working in Alberta's public service and then in the Northwest Territories public policy services, she taught poli-sci at the University of Victoria, and she published several books on social policy in Canada and internationally, and works on federalism as well. She did extensive analyses of the evolution of social dialogue in Canada, and that's why I will draw freely on her writings and on the scientific studies I conducted while I was a university professor, and also drawing on my experience in the employment sector. Now, at the federal level, social dialogue around employment issues took shape as early as 1940. Now, specifically at that time, when the UI program was established, it was done so under the direction of the Tripartite Unemployment Insurance Commission. So it was a tripartite body independent of government. Initially, the program was funded equally by employer and employee contributions of 40% of the cost of the plan for each group and 20% from the federal government. However, the federal government stopped contributing to the plan in 1990. This tripartite commission had significant UI management responsibilities from 1940 to 1976. In 1965, the tripartite EI Commission lost responsibility for employment and placement services, which were transferred to the Department of Labor and then to the Department of Manpower and Immigration. In 1976, the Commission lost control over the management of compensation at the Department of Employment and Immigration. Its makeup was changed from 3 to 4 members: 1 employer representative, 1 worker representative, and 2 departmental representatives. The chair of the commission was assigned to the deputy minister. And it was at this time that the commission pretty much became what it is today. Its responsibilities were to evaluate the unemployment insurance program, to approve policies, to issue certain regulations, to set the premium rate, and supervise the Administrative Appeals Tribunal, at least until recently, when even that responsibility was removed through the back door. And we can come back to that later on. Now, it can also be said that for nearly 35 years, unemployment insurance was a tripartite institution which was gradually stripped by the government of its powers over the governance of a system which the partners currently finance 100%. It's also at this time, so 1976, that the unemployment insurance system underwent a host of transformations which responded to political issues which were often far removed from the logic of the labor market. And the participation rate went from 80 to 50%. Now, in addition to the now defunct tripartite commission, advisory committees were established from 1941 to 1998. The last one was the Canadian Labour Force Development Board. That was created in 1991, and it was disbanded in 1998.
These institutions ended up dissolving. According to the late Professor Donna Wood analysis, the most influential factor to cause the demise of advisory bodies was the propensity of the Government of Canada to reorganize and realign government responsibilities, abandoning or changing advisory committees in the process. As UI and its various component pieces got moved around organizationally by the federal government, advisory committees were recast and weakened. The lack of legislation establishing these advisory committees most likely contributed to their easy dismantling. However, in the case of the Canadian Labour Force Development Board, Professor Woods gathers that the government may have unwelcomed some of the messaging and therefore reduced its financial support, which ultimately led to business stakeholders pulling the plug. For almost 20 years, to facilitate business and labor input into employment policy in Canada comes from uniquely the actual Employment Insurance Commission. When input on larger issues than EI is needed, the Government of Canada has set up ad hoc consultation or has referred the issue to committees such as UMA, because we don't have any committee on human resources in the Senate, in the lower chamber, which serve as fast-track option for governments seeking more specialized advice on short notice instead of a permanent advisory bodies that tend to have a broad and long-term expertise. I would be remiss if I did not mention the Economic Council of Canada as an experience of tripartism in Canada, of multipartism in Canada. This organization, financed by the federal government, was created in 1963 and dismantled in 1992 when the studies of the council did not please the government of the day and the department or the Department of Finance. The council was first composed of labor, business, and other groups' representatives. Its composition changed later by the appointment of individuals instead of representative of institutions. It produced applied studies on issues of growth, equity in the labor market, and other issues of the day. Its mandate was to help building consensus in Canada. I had the privilege to be appointed for 2 mandates of 3 years each to the Economic Council, once by Prime Minister Elliott Trudeau and reappointed by Prime Minister Mulroney. To conclude this section of my speech, let me quote Professor Wood from one of her last articles entitled, and I underline the title because it says a lot, "The 75-Year Decline, How Government Expropriated Employment Insurance from Canadian Workers and Employers, and Why This Matters." There are many reasons why business and labor oversight, and I quote her, "There are many reasons why business and labor oversight and input into EI has diminished over time. Certainly, the combination of cabinet government and executive federalism creates in Canada a closed, elite-dominated process involving primarily politicians and bureaucrats in any policy area. The absence of vertically integrated, highly representative, encompassing pan-Canadian business and labor organization exacerbate the business-labor divide and impedes their capacity to interact with government and with each other. The dismantling over the past 20 years of all pan-Canadian advisory committees and research institutions responsible for employment has eliminated spaces where fruitful conversation used to occur. And to conclude my speech, let me quote again Donna Wood. Putting the business-labor-government partnership on a more formal footing through a National Labour Market Partners Council would go a long way towards optimally repositioning Canada labour market programming for the 21st century. C'est exactement ce que fait ce projet.
This bill does just that, and it's being enthusiastically received by both employers and workers' organizations.
President and Chief Executive Officer of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce stated the following: with the creation of an Employment Insurance Advisory Council, Senator Bellemare Bill S-244 will enshrine a true and meaningful tripartite approach between business, labor, and government. This will ensure that the employment insurance program is sustainable, responsive, nonpartisan, inclusive, and relevant for current and future generations of Canadian employers and employees. The President of the Canadian Labour Congress, Ms. Bea Brusk, declared that Bill S-244 will absolutely strengthen the voices of the social partners in the work of the tripartite IE Commission. In turn, by inscribing social dialogue at the heart of the EI system, Senator Bellemare's bill will improve the efficacy and responsiveness of labour market policy making in Canada to the benefit of workers and our economy. Chers collègues, ce projet de loi.
Dear colleagues, this bill has officially received the support of large market partners and other partners, and it's now up to the government to get involved. The bill is important now because we have to fundamentally reform the employment insurance system, and the people who contribute to the system have to be involved. It's not just a matter of principle, but of effectiveness and fairness. So I ask you, dear colleagues, to quickly support second reading of this bill so that it can be sent to committee as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Senator Ranguette.
Senator Ranguette. Is Senator Bellemare willing to take a couple of questions? Yes, absolutely. First, congratulations for having tabled this bill, and thank you for your speech. I certainly support the idea of social dialogue, economic dialogue, community-based dialogue. We have to involve communities, provinces, and the federal government. In fact, we have to basically bring together all of these organizations. However, I would like you to explain to me how, in your proposal for the creation of this advisory council or committee, how can isolated regions, communities, Indigenous people, agricultural, forestry workers, fisheries workers, how are all these people and organizations going to have a voice? Because these people, these groups, are and have been affected by changes in the EI program in the last 20 years. And in fact, these changes have come at the expense of workers. So how will this council help to bring about the change that you're looking for within your bill? Well, I was expecting that, so thank you for the question. So in the bill, because there were a lot of discussions amongst all stakeholders, we met often over Zoom, of course. We had a lot of discussion, and that was the main issue. How do we bring about all of these groups people living in isolated regions, indigenous groups. So we were looking for a way to give them all a voice, and this council would work with the labor ministers from all provinces and include indigenous representatives. That was an idea we wanted to put forth, but it didn't work also for legal reasons. So the Labor Market Forum doesn't have a legal status, and so within this group of stakeholders, we wanted to make sure that when we talk about Part 1 and contributions to the system, we wanted to have the possibility of inviting groups, be it provinces, isolated regions, and others, to take part in the dialogue. And this tripartite commission would be a federal organization. It would have at least 12 members, the 2 commissioners and 5 representatives from major organizations. And it resembles a bit the model that exists in Quebec, the labor market partners. It doesn't include all regions at the table, but there are regional committees, and there are committees for fairness, for instance. And so we have to take all of these things into account in this debate. Experience has shown that from the outset, it's really important to recognize that the approach we must take is a tripartite one when it comes to labor issues. And so within the bill, this commission would invite any partners or groups which are concerned. And I believe it is important to make that effort. So this is just an advisory commission. It doesn't have binding powers. It would advise, and its mandate would be to advise based on policy and programs, and to eventually launch their own studies and table them and present them to Parliament and present them to the minister. But again, this commission will not manage the EI system. That's not what I'm saying. It's an advisory body to support the commissioners in their work.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. If Senator Bellemare will take.
You have about 2 minutes left, Senator Lankin.
Thank you very much, Speaker. Senator Bellemare, I very much support the intent of what you're doing, and I believe that in many areas it is important to have the players at the table, and certainly with respect to EI, where these are employer and employee funds, it is critical that they have a major role. This may not be a fair question, but I wonder if you've had an opportunity to look at Division 32 of the Budget Implementation Act, which deals with the establishment of the direction for an executive head to report only to the CI, the head of the CI Commission, and not the tripartite body. It is of concern to many, and it's Senator Youssef who's raised this concern and is working on it the hardest in our chamber. I wonder if you share those concerns, and whether we need to take a look, in light of the intent of where you're going to go, we need to take a look at Division 32 in more depth.
Senator Bellemare.
Absolutely, Senator Lankin. And, you know, this is an example where there's no sensitivity for the social partners, because at the beginning, they had the social partner had the oversight of the appeal mechanism. And I can tell you that both the union side and the employer side are have a lot of problem with this Section 32, Section 5 of the C-19. I can assure you of that. And another example of why social partners are important in those areas, they are, and in training too. Like the government, at some instance, some years ago, they proposed the allocation for training. It was a very nice program, I thought, but it succeeded in creating unanimity against it by both sides, because it does not answer the need and it doesn't take into account their reality.
Senator Martin.
I move the adjournment to the debate.
Moved by the Honourable Senator Martin, seconded by the Honourable Senator Seidman, that further debate be adjourned until the next sitting of the Senate. If you're opposed to the motion, please say no. Carried. Adopted.